The morning fog rolled in from the Baltic Sea like a slow-moving tide of ghostly white, wrapping the Saint Petersburg port in a shroud of cold silence, where there had once been the constant thunder of containers striking steel, the whirring of giant cranes, and the rumble of diesel engines. There was now only the whisper of wind sweeping across empty asphalt. The silence felt unnatural, wrong, even as if the port itself were holding its breath. Sergei Miroshkin stood at the edge of Dock 7, his gloved hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn navy blue coat. Frost clung to his eyelashes, and his breath billowed in clouds as he stared out at the harbor. For nearly 3 decades, he had watched ships from every corner of the world arrive here, massive vessels with flags of nations he had never visited but felt he somehow knew. Today the water was empty, calm, reflecting the bleak winter sky like a mirror. Pavel, only 10 years younger but with twice as many complaints, stomped across the dock to join him. "Strange, isn't it?" he muttered, kicking at a patch of ice. The sound echoed sharp in the stillness. Sergei didn't answer at first. He let his eyes wander to the rusting cranes frozen mid-motion, towering like abandoned monuments from some forgotten civilization. "It's not strange," he said eventually. "It's the end of something." "You can feel it," Pavel snorted. "End of what? A bad week? Maybe 2? But even he didn't sound convinced. The notices had come in sudden waves, contracts canceled, shipments rerouted, foreign partners withdrawing entirely. Corporations that once lined up for Baltic access now seemed to flee overnight. And with them went the lifeblood of the port. A cold gust rattled a loose metal panel on a nearby warehouse. The faint clatter made Sergei flinch. He had grown so accustomed to constant industrial noise that the near-perfect quiet unsettled him. "They say another company pulled out this morning," Pavel said, lowering his voice as though afraid the cranes themselves might overhear. 5,000 workers across all ports. Gone just like that. Sergei nodded slowly. "It's bigger than us. Bigger than this place." His gaze drifted toward the horizon where the faint outline of an idle cargo ship sat anchored, far from shore, waiting undecided, perhaps unwelcome. The port that once pulsed with movement now looked like a battlefield after the fighting had ended. Empty, abandoned, echoing with the memory of what had been. The sharp screech of metal on metal echoed across the Novorossiysk rail yard as the lone freight train rolled to a stop. The sound usually blended into the daily thunder of hundreds of incoming and outgoing cars. But today it stood out, too loud, too lonely. The Black Sea air carried a damp chill, and a thin veil of mist clung to the tracks, blurring the lines between steel and sea. Elena Volkova stepped down from the platform, her boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel. She had been a logistics manager here for almost a decade, long enough to know every creaking rail and worn-out locomotive by heart. Normally she would hurry toward the arriving train with a clipboard in one hand and a radio buzzing at her hip. But this morning she walked slowly, almost reluctantly, as if delaying the moment she would have to confront the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. The train's operator leaned out of the cabin, giving her a grim nod. "This the last one?" she asked. He tapped the rusted metal door with a gloved hand. "Looks like it." Elena opened the container manifest clipped to her folder. It was shockingly thin, barely half a page. The usual multiple stamp sequence from foreign partners was missing, replaced instead by a simple notice typed in block letters. "Contract terminated, future shipments suspended." She read it twice, though the words didn't change. Her stomach tightened. Her radio crackled suddenly, jolting her from her thoughts. "Elena, you there?" The voice belonged to Victor from headquarters, usually cheerful but now hollow. "I'm here," she responded. "They want you back as soon as you finish up. They're closing the entire Baltic Black Sea corridor. Effective immediately." A pause, then softer. "We all knew it was coming." Elena lowered the manifest and looked around. The large freight yard that once swarmed with forklifts, shouting workers, and the endless shuffle of containers was nearly empty. Only a handful of employees lingered around like ghosts, unsure if they should keep working or simply go home. The cranes on the shoreline stood motionless, their silhouettes fading into the rising fog over the Black Sea. She walked along the length of the train, dragging her hand across the cold steel. This train had carried goods from Europe, Asia, the Balkans, bridging distant worlds. It had been more than a machine. It was a line of connection, a line of hope. Now it felt like a relic waiting to be retired. The rhythmic hum of cargo trains, the heartbeat of her entire career was fading into memory. As Elena closed the manifest and signaled the operator to begin unloading the modest cargo, she whispered to herself, "Everything changes." A heavy layer of winter clouds hung low over Moscow, dimming the daylight and casting the Kremlin's ancient towers in muted shades of iron and ash. Inside one of the palace's inner chambers, the atmosphere felt just as gray. The room was paneled in dark walnut, polished to a shine, though the flickering reflections from the brass lamps gave it a restless, uneasy glow. Maps covered an entire wall, weathered, color-coded, crowded with pins of every size and hue. The air smelled faintly of old paper, ink, and cold coffee. Minister Korovin stood at the head of the oval table, shoulders squared but face drawn. He was a man who had survived 5 administrations, 3 crises, and countless shifts in policy. But this was different. He traced a finger along the map from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea, stopping where the pins thinned out like a dying constellation. "All gone in a matter of weeks," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Across from him, Advisor Leonid Savostin rolled up his sleeves and leaned over the table. His pen tapped rapidly, a nervous habit he usually controlled, but today couldn't suppress. 27 foreign partners have withdrawn, he said, flipping open a folder thick with reports. Ports shut down or abandoned, logistics frozen, insurance companies refusing coverage. It's not a slowdown, it's a disintegration. He jabbed the tip of the pen at the Baltic region. These companies didn't just pause operations. They fled overnight. The third man in the room, a younger strategist named Yevgeny Morozov, shifted uneasily. He was new enough to still believe that every problem had a clean solution. But the map in front of him, littered with red and black markings, told a different story. "This is more than economics," Korovin said quietly, straightening. "This is our maritime heartbeat. These routes shaped our modern supply chains. They connected us to half the world." "Connected," Leonid echoed. Past tense. A silence stretched across the room, heavy and thick. Outside, faint footsteps echoed in the long marble hall. Snowflakes drifted past the windows, soft and indifferent, as though the world beyond the Kremlin walls were calmly carrying on without them. "What's the contingency?" Yevgeny asked finally. "Surely there's something we can redirect, new partners, new corridors." "There are ideas," Leonid replied. "But ideas don't replace $50 billion of infrastructure overnight." Korovin slowly lifted a blue pin from a shrinking cluster and held it between his fingers. "The world has changed," he said, "and we will have to change with it." A soft hum filled the conference hall in Kazan as people gathered, their voices low, their expressions wary but alert. The building was modern, glass walls, steel beams, bright screens, yet the mood inside felt almost ceremonial, like a gathering held at the crossroads of past and future. Snow slid down the tall windows in slanted streaks, blurring the outline of the frozen Volga outside. Sergei Miroshkin stood awkwardly near the back, hands folded in front of him. He had never been invited to anything like this. Dock workers weren't the kind of people governments usually called in for strategic consultations. Still, here he was, one of the many workers chosen to attend and share perspectives, though he suspected they would mostly listen. Elena Volkova arrived moments later, looking around until she spotted him. She approached with a tired smile. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said. "Didn't think I'd be here," Sergei replied, rubbing the back of his neck. Before they could say more, the overhead lights dimmed and a deep, authoritative voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming." A massive screen lit up at the front, displaying a glowing Arctic map. Lines stretched across northern Russia, thick blue corridors winding from Murmansk to Vladivostok, shimmering like neon arteries pulsing with possibility. Minister Korovin appeared on stage, the same fatigue still visible on his face, but now layered with determination. "The Baltic Black Sea network is gone," he began without preamble. "But Russia does not end where those ports end." Around the room, murmurs rose, some skeptical, others hopeful. Korovin gestured toward the glowing Arctic lines. "We must build new lifelines. The Northern Sea Passage, overland routes through Siberia, reinforced ties with Central Asia. This is not a replacement, it is a reinvention." A series of blueprints flashed on the screen. Modernized Arctic ports, New rail junctions, icebreaker fleets cutting through frozen waters, supply hubs in regions few people had ever traveled. Elena leaned toward Sergei. "It's ambitious," she whispered. He nodded. "Or desperate?" But even as he said it, he couldn't tear his eyes from the screen. When Korovin opened the floor for contributions, Elena surprised herself by standing. "We can't rebuild what's gone," she said firmly, her voice carrying through the vast room. "But we can build something new if we make sure the people running these routes aren't left behind." Heads turned. Even Korovin paused. Then Sergei added, voice gruff but steady, "Ports die. Cities change. But people, we adapt." The room fell silent for a moment as the two maps, the old and the new, glowed softly behind them. Beyond the glass walls, snow continued to fall, whispering over the frozen river.